Black Lives Matter is not helping Joe Biden. Black Lives Matter is not helping the Democrat Party. Black Lives Matter is helping Donald Trump and the Republicans. When you keep expressing antagonism towards the police, when you keep talking about defunding the police, we have to defund the cops because cops are evil and cops are the imposers of an oppressive, systemic, racist system. When you support rioters and looters, and you say things like, well, the looting really isn't immoral because those businesses are not black owned. A lot of those businesses are owned by people who are not even part of our community. So therefore, they are only here to exploit the labor of our people and to also exploit the wealth, the capital of our people. They are taking black people's money for their products. So when we see looters and rioters damaging the property of these businesses, we have to remember now, we have to acknowledge the fact that those businesses are simply exploiting the local black community. When you hear rhetoric like this, and yes, people do talk like this, it doesn't really help your cause. I did a video about this a number of nights ago, and I talked about how the rioting and the looting is actually helping Donald Trump, because when a lot of Americans see this sort of BS, they're going to vote for Donald Trump. They're going to vote for the guy who says, I support the police. We are going to bring law and order in the community, in the population. And the Democrat Party is all about Black Lives Matter. The Democrat Party is automatically associated with BLM. They can't get rid of that. So the support for Black Lives Matter amongst the American population is greatly declining. Greatly declining. In fact, USA Today did an article on this today, and it talks about how support for Black Lives Matter in the general American population is going down. And when I read this, it didn't surprise me at all, because when you have thousands upon thousands upon thousands of some of the most obnoxiously ugly, and stupid people in the world screaming and hollering about whatever, most people don't give a damn about what those people have to say. You know, optics is everything. Optics is everything. And if you have, let's say, a demonstration that consists of clean-cut people, and they are protesting in an organized fashion without violence, people generally will respect those demonstrators. But when you have a bunch of people with purple hair, covered in tattoos, walking around with sandals and tank tops, and you have grown men with purple hair, they dye their hair, they look like complete mutants, to be honest. When you see this sort of thing, it just looks really ugly. And of course, they're loud and they're obnoxious, and they say things that are extremely unrealistic. Extremely unrealistic, like, let's defund the police. Anytime the average American feels that they are amongst a threat or that they are in a threatening situation, what do they almost always say? They almost always never say, I'm going to fight you or I'm going to defend myself. they almost always say, I'm calling the police. You hear this all the time. And if it's not the police, if the situation is not really that threatening at a physical level, they'll say something like, I'm calling my lawyer, and you'll even hear children say things like this. But when a lot of Americans feel that they are under threat, they always say, I'm calling the police. So when your slogan, or when one of your slogans is defund the police, how does that help you optics-wise? It damages your entire movement. And when you are going to random restaurants, harassing random people and telling them to make a vow of support for BLM, nobody likes that shit. Nobody likes that BS. Nobody does. Listen, people get frustrated and pissed off enough about Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses going to their homes, knocking on their doors, asking if they want to hear about Joseph Smith or, I don't know, Charles Taze Russell or whatever the hell his name was. Most people get annoyed by that. Almost everyone gets annoyed by that. That's why, for example, people who convert to the Jehovah's Witness cult usually are people who aren't that bright, to say it nicely. You'll see the Jehovah's Witnesses at the airport, and they have a little table. I don't know if they still do this with coronavirus, but I remember for years, you go to the airport, and you would always see at least 2 Jehovah's Witnesses behind a table in an airport saying, hey, let's talk about our religion. And people just got out of a plane. They have jet lag, they're pissed off, they're frustrated, they're dealing with the divorce, whatever's going on. They don't want to hear that crap. So if people at an airport don't want to hear about some theological position from Jehovah's Witnesses, what makes you think that people at a restaurant want to hear about BLM? People go to restaurants to relax and to unwind or whatever. They don't want to hear your nonsense about defunding the police. Another thing also is people's experiences with police officers in the United States are generally very, very cordial. Generally speaking, very cordial. You will have bad apples, of course, but those are extremely rare, and for the most part, they do get dealt with by their superiors. I remember years ago, we went to the airport with my dad to drop him off, and some police officer started yelling at my dad because he accidentally hit the back of this person's car. Well, it didn't really hit. He actually just tapped. It was like and there was nothing there. There was no dents. There was no damage. There was nothing there. It was just a light little tap on the back of this guy's vehicle. And this police officer was yelling at my dad. And my dad said, why are you speaking to me in a disrespectful way? And this police officer said, oh, apparently there's a language barrier here because, it's obvious to me that English is not your first language. And you can tell by the intonation of my voice what background this guy came from. Yeah, this police officer was black. And he was very rude, very obnoxious, and very, just not a very easy person to deal with. But not too long after this took place, by not too long, I mean literally like minutes after this police officer walked away, another police officer came and said, is there a problem? And we said, yeah, this cop came and started yelling at my father, and it wasn't very nice. And this cop said, was he tall? I said, yeah. He said, was he black? Yeah. And he goes, yeah, we've dealt with this guy before. He's pretty nasty. And this officer said, listen, come to our office at this day. We'll talk about it. And so we went to the office on the designated date, and this other police officer was there, and he said, listen, we really apologize for how this guy was acting. And this is not the first time we've had to discipline this guy. So we never saw that cop ever again. So people's experiences with police officers are generally very cordial. When the officer tells you to put your hands on the steering wheel and you keep your hands on the steering wheel and you comply, you're going to be fine. If he tells you to put your hands on the steering wheel and you put your hands on the steering wheel and then you slowly begin to creep down like that, he's going to get very paranoid. because you could pull out a pistol and shoot him. Now, you have these anarchist types who are extremely stupid and extremely obnoxious, and just generally speaking, very rebellious people. You have these anarchist types who say things like, oh, so I have to comply not to get shot. I have to comply not to be arrested. So this is tyranny. And it's like, these types of arguments are very weaselly, because there's no such thing as absolute freedom. You are always going to need people to enforce the law. You are always going to need people to keep the peace and maintain peace in society, and that means using force on certain situations. And really, because we live in a world where violence is real, when the officer tells you to put your hands on the steering wheel and you're not complying and you're moving the hand down like that, he has every right to think that you are a potential threat, because that's just reality. This whole thing about like, well, you have to comply. Well, yeah, you always have to comply. Like when you go to the DMV, yeah, you comply. When you go to school, you comply with what your professor says. Yes, this is life. This is reality. Yes, there has to be some compliance to rules and laws. If not, then, we're up the creek, really. And if these anarchists ever got their way, we would also have to comply to certain rules as well, because that's just the reality of human existence. I want to read to you guys some parts of this article from USA Today. It talks about how BLM is losing popularity. It's very, very interesting. It says here that Democrats may have hoped that the national reckoning on race would be a favorable issue for 2020, but the street violence has overwhelmed their reform message. CNN's Don Lemon bemoaned the fact that the rioting is showing up in the polling and showing up in focus groups. He said the rioting has to stop because it is the only thing right now that is sticking. So Don Lemon is saying, hey, rioting isn't helping the Democrat Party. Lemon offered no evidence to back up his claim about polls and focus groups, but other reports support it. The Civics Tracking poll is particularly interesting for understanding the dynamics at play. Net approval for the Black Lives Matter movement peaked back on June 3rd and has fallen sharply since. This was just over a week after George Floyd was killed in Minneapolis, when riots had begun to sweep major cities. Among whites, net approval is already negative and headed downward. Yes, because the general American population doesn't like this shit. It's ugly, it's obnoxious, it's dirty, it spouts all sorts of disgusting, unrealistic ideas like defunding the police, or abolish the police, or all cops are bastards. This type of thing doesn't work with the average person in the United States. Maybe it works in some third world country where nobody gives a shit about culture and rules, but in the United States, the general population doesn't like this sort of BS. So it's all going down. BLM is not helping Biden. BLM is helping Donald Trump. So if there is a group that you should be thanking, if you want Trump to win, if there is a group that you should be thanking Black Lives Matter. Because Black Lives Matter is helping Donald Trump. If anything, Donald Trump is secretly thinking to himself, or telling his inner circle, thank God for BLM. And isn't it interesting that when Obama was president, BLM was headline news? They were all over the place because you had these riots taking place over BS claims about the police. And that really helped Trump. It really made Obama look bad. And then when Trump got in office, BLM kind of disappeared or really became old news. And now they're back in the headlines. It's almost as if they are there to support a certain political purpose. Anyway, hope you guys have enjoyed this message. Hope you guys have learned something from this message. You guys just heard some theology. God bless.